Okay, so in emergency medicine, we check electrolytes and nutrient levels every single day. Things like magnesium, calcium, potassium, sodium, vitamin B12, folate, because when these levels are wrong, people get very sick very quickly. But here's what most people walking through our doors don't seem to realise. These abnormalities don't just appear overnight. By the time someone's wheeled into the A&E with an unstable heart rhythm or severe confusion or muscles that have stopped working properly, those deficiencies have usually been developing quietly in the background for months, even years sometimes. My name's Dr. Alex, and over the last 10 years working in emergency departments, I've become fascinated by these sorts of patterns. I've seen how modern diets can be packed with calories but completely stripped of the micronutrients that our bodies actually need to function. I've watched people struggle with symptoms for years, being told that the blood tests are normal, only to discover that those tests weren't designed to catch early depletion. They're built to flag late-stage disease. And what really drives me is knowing that so much of this is preventable if we understand what to look for before it becomes an emergency. So today, I want to share the insights that I've gained from years of seeing what happens when these deficiencies go unnoticed. Think of what follows in this video as a ladder. We'll start at the bottom with the really common deficiencies that affect millions of people every single day. The ones that drain your energy, the ones that cloud your thinking and make you feel like you're constantly running on empty. Then we'll climb a bit higher towards the more serious deficiencies that can destabilize your heart, they can damage your nerves, and in some cases become genuinely life-threatening, especially if you try to treat them yourself without proper testing. Because this is the other pattern that I see constantly. People supplementing or restricting nutrients based on what they see on the internet, not realising that both too much and too little can cause real harm. Starting at the bottom, we have the deficiencies that might not land you in hospital tomorrow, but they absolutely could wreck your quality of life today. These are the ones behind that persistent tiredness that coffee can't quite seem to fix, the mood that never quite lifts, the sleep that never quite feels enough. And the frustrating thing is that millions of people are walking around with these deficiencies right now, putting up with symptoms they think are just part of modern life. Number one on the list today is vitamin D. Now, the reason this sits at the top of the list isn't because it's the most dangerous. It's because it's probably the most widespread deficiency in the modern world. And most people have absolutely no idea they're low. Your body needs sunlight hitting your skin to produce vitamin D, but we've engineered a lifestyle where that barely happens anymore. Most of us work indoors under artificial light. We drive to work in cars. We're covered in clothes and sunscreen for most of the day when we go outside. And we live in countries where the sun's angle isn't quite strong enough for half the year anyway. The result is that your vitamin D levels slowly drop and you start feeling it in ways that seem completely unrelated. You feel more tired than you should, your muscles ache for no clear reason, you pick up every cold and flu virus going around, your mood takes a hit, especially through the winter. And because vitamin D affects everything from your immune system to your muscles to your bones, the symptoms are so vague that people rarely connect them to one specific cause. What makes this really difficult is that standard blood tests often don't check vitamin D unless you've already developed bone problems or you're specifically asking for it. So what happens is people suffer through years of low-grade symptoms without ever knowing there's a simple explanation. Moving on to number 2, which is magnesium. So if vitamin D is the most common deficiency, magnesium might be the most underappreciated because it's involved in over 300 chemical reactions in your body. And yet hardly anyone thinks about it until something goes wrong. So magnesium is what your muscles need to relax after they contract, which means that when you're low, your muscles stay tense. That's why one of the most classic signs is muscle cramps, especially at night. Your calves suddenly seize up or you get those annoying eyelid twitches that won't stop. But magnesium also affects your nervous system, and low levels can make you feel really genuinely anxious for no obvious reason. Your heart might start feeling like it's skipping beats or racing randomly. Your sleep becomes terrible because your body can't switch off properly. And none of this shows up dramatically on standard blood tests because most of your magnesium lives inside your cells, not floating around in your bloodstream. The depletion of magnesium happens gradually through modern eating patterns. Ultra-processed foods are basically magnesium-free. Stress burns through magnesium faster than normal. Alcohol depletes it as well. And then medications like proton pump inhibitors or PPIs or things like omeprazole, lansoprazole, esomeprazole, the ones that people take for acid reflux, these reduce magnesium absorption over time as well. So what happens is you end up with this slow drain that leaves you feeling wired and tired at the same time. And when you finally mention it to a doctor, your blood tests come back normal because serum magnesium, the magnesium in your blood, is the last thing to drop. This is why many people feel dramatically better when they start supplementing magnesium, even though their blood work is never flagged as a problem. The one group who needs to be really cautious are those with advanced kidney disease, because if your kidneys can't clear the excess magnesium properly, levels can rise dangerously high. Number 3 is iron deficiency. And this one deserves a special mention because it's incredibly common, but it's also really easy to get wrong if you don't test it first. So iron is the core component of hemoglobin, which is the protein in your red blood cells that carries oxygen around your body. When iron drops too low, your tissues don't get enough oxygen and you feel it immediately. You're exhausted in a way that rest doesn't fix. Climbing the stairs leaves you breathless, your concentration disappears, your hair might start falling out or becoming thinner than usual. Some people even develop restless legs, which is that irresistible urge to move your legs at night that completely ruins your sleep. And while these symptoms are obvious once you recognise them, they're also the exact symptoms of about 50 other conditions. So iron deficiency often gets missed for years. Now, the most common cause in women is menstrual blood loss. And if you don't replace it through your diet, then your stores can gradually drop. Men and postmenopausal women who become iron deficient usually have something else going on, things like poor absorption from celiac disease or inflammatory bowel conditions. Or they're losing blood somewhere else that they don't realise, which is something that absolutely needs investigating. And here's the crucial part. When doctors test for iron deficiency, many of them only check your hemoglobin, which tells you if you're actually anemic. But by that point, you've already burned through all of your iron stores. The test that catches it earlier is called ferritin, which measures your stored iron, and that often gets overlooked. The reason testing matters so much with iron is that while deficiency causes all these problems, iron overload causes completely different problems. Too much iron is toxic. It damages your liver, your heart, and your pancreas. Some people have genetic conditions that make them absorb too much iron, and supplementing makes things dramatically worse. So this is absolutely a test first, then supplement situation. Number 4 is vitamin B12, and this is where deficiencies start affecting your nervous system in ways that can become permanent if caught too late. Now, B12 is essential for making myelin, which is the protective coating around your nerves that allow electrical signals to travel properly. When B12 levels drop, that coating starts to break down and you can develop symptoms that are quite concerning. One of the classic signs that people describe are pins and needles in their hands and their feet that gradually spread and worsen. People also say their balance becomes unstable because the nerves sending position information from your legs to your brain aren't working properly. People say their thinking becomes foggy and slow. Some people develop memory problems that look disturbingly similar to Alzheimer's disease. And the frightening part is that if this goes on for too long, the nerve damage can become irreversible. You can replace the B12, but the nerves don't fully recover. Now, B12 deficiency develops in a few key groups. People following strict plant-based diets are at obvious risk because B12 only comes from animal products. No amount of vegetables will provide it, so supplementation isn't optional, it's essential. Older adults become deficient because stomach acid production drops with age, and you need acid to extract B12 from food. There's also an autoimmune condition called pernicious anemia, where your body attacks the cells that help absorb B12. And if that's the cause, you need B12 injections for life rather than tablets. And here's an interesting one, which is metformin, the most commonly prescribed diabetes medication in the world. This gradually depletes B12 over years of use. But hardly anyone mentions this to patients or tests for it routinely. The problem with testing is that serum B12, the standard blood test, it can miss deficiency because it measures total B12, not the active forms in your body that it actually uses. So some people can have normal B12 levels on paper while their nerves are actively being damaged. This is why doctors sometimes treat based on symptoms and response to treatments rather than waiting for tests to become definitively abnormal, because by then the damage might be done. Now, as we move up the ladder, we reach deficiencies that might not be as widespread as the ones we just covered. But when they're missed, they don't just affect your energy or your mood. They start affecting how your organs actually function. These are the ones that make you genuinely unwell over time. So coming in at number 5 is folate, which is also called vitamin B9. And it works closely alongside vitamin B12 in many of the same processes. Your body needs folate to make DNA and red blood cells properly. And without enough of it, you develop anemia that makes you feel exhausted and weak. Your mouth might start to develop painful ulcers that keep coming back. You feel run down and can't shake infections off properly. The deficiency typically shows up in people who don't eat enough leafy green veg, which is where the name actually comes from. Folate literally means foliage, but it's also really common in people who drink heavily because alcohol interferes with how your body absorbs and uses folate. Anyone with conditions that affect nutrient absorption, things like celiac disease or Crohn's, is also at higher risk. Now here's what's crucial about folate. You should never ever supplement it without first checking B12 levels, because folate can mask B12 deficiency on blood tests while the nerve damage continues silently in the background. So doctors always test both of them together. And if both of them are low, they treat B12 first or simultaneously to protect your nervous system. Moving on to number 6, which is iodine. And this one controls your entire metabolic rate through your thyroid gland. Now, iodine is the raw material your thyroid uses to make thyroid hormones. And these hormones basically set the speed at which your body runs. When iodine is deficient, your thyroid can't produce enough hormone, so your metabolism slows down. You feel tired and cold all the time. Your weight creeps up, even though you're not eating more. Your hair becomes thin and brittle. Your thinking slows. And in severe long-term deficiency, your thyroid gland actually swells as it tries desperately to capture more iodine, forming what we call a goiter, a visible lump in your neck. Now, iodine used to be a massive public health problem until countries started adding iodine to table salt, which basically solved it at a population level. But we're now seeing it creep back up as people switch to Himalayan salt or sea salt, which sounds healthier but contains almost no iodine. And also as dairy consumption drops, which was another major dietary source. The problem with iodine is that it's rarely tested routinely, so deficiency often gets missed until someone develops obvious thyroid problems. And you can't just supplement iodine freely because too much can actually trigger or worsen thyroid disease, especially in people with underlying autoimmune thyroid conditions. So this sits in this awkward middle ground where deficiency is bad, excess is bad, and testing isn't routine. Number 7 is zinc, and while it doesn't get as much attention as iron or vitamin D, it's absolutely essential for your immune function and healing. Zinc is what your immune system needs to produce and activate immune cells properly. So when you're deficient, you get sick constantly and take forever to recover. Wounds heal slowly. You might lose your sense of taste or smell, which sounds minor but actually ruins your appetite and your quality of life. Your hair falls out more often than normal. Men can develop reproductive issues because zinc is crucial for testosterone production. Now, the groups at most risk are people who don't eat much animal protein because plant sources of zinc are poorly absorbed. And the other group are people with chronic inflammatory conditions like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, where ongoing inflammation depletes zinc faster than normal. The reason I'm quite cautious about zinc is that while short-term supplementation during an illness is probably fine, long-term high-dose zinc supplementation causes copper deficiency because these two minerals compete for absorption. And copper deficiency causes its own serious problems, including anemia and nerve damage that look identical to B12 deficiency. So zinc is one where less is often more, and food sources are safer than high-dose supplements taken indefinitely. Now, this is the part of the video where things escalate from just feeling unwell to actively dangerous. The deficiencies we're about to talk about here don't just make you feel tired or foggy. They can literally destabilize your heart rhythm, they can cause seizures, and in extreme cases, they can actually kill you. And critically, several of these are made worse by you trying to fix them yourself without medical guidance. Number 8 is potassium, and this is the first deficiency on this list that you should absolutely never treat yourself. Now, potassium is the main electrolyte inside your cells, and it's essential for proper muscle function, including your heart muscle. When potassium drops too low, a condition we call hypokalemia, your muscles become weak, sometimes to the point where you can't stand or move properly. But the dangerous part is what happens to your heart. Low potassium makes your heart rhythm unstable, increasing the risk of arrhythmias that can be life-threatening. People describe feeling palpitations, like the heart is skipping beats or racing randomly, and in severe cases, your heart can stop entirely. Now, potassium depletion typically happens when you're losing fluids faster than you're replacing them. Things like vomiting, diarrhea, or people with diuretic medications that make you pee out excess fluid along with potassium. Eating disorders involving purging are also a major cause. Now, the reason you never supplement potassium without testing and without medical advice is that a high potassium, what we call hyperkalemia, is just as dangerous as low potassium. And in some ways, more so, because it can cause sudden cardiac arrest with almost no warning. Your kidneys normally regulate potassium tightly, but if your kidney function drops or you take certain medications, potassium can climb rapidly. So this is one of those where both ends of the spectrum can kill you, and trying to guess is genuinely reckless. Number 9 on the list is calcium, and this is another one where people assume supplementation is always beneficial, where the reality is far more complicated. Now, calcium is obviously essential for bone health, but it's also crucial for muscle contraction, for nerve signaling, and blood clotting. When calcium levels drop acutely, which is called hypocalcemia, you get muscle spasms, tingling in your mouth and in your fingers, and in severe cases, you can get seizures. Your heart rhythm becomes unstable, but here's what's important. Calcium deficiency is rarely a dietary problem on its own. Most of the time, when calcium is low, it's because something else is going wrong. Very often it's vitamin D deficiency because you need vitamin D to absorb calcium properly. Sometimes it's a parathyroid problem where the glands that regulate calcium aren't working properly. Occasionally it's related to kidney disease or specific medications. So if calcium is genuinely low on blood tests, the question isn't, should I take more calcium? It's, why is my body not maintaining normal calcium levels? Now, blind supplementation has become controversial in recent years because there's evidence that high doses might increase cardiovascular risk in some people, though the research is still being debated. What's clear is that most people really do get enough calcium from their diet, so if blood tests are actually low, you need to investigate the cause properly rather than just throwing supplements at it. Moving on to number 10, which is thiamine, also called vitamin B1. And this one is genuinely missed all of the time despite causing severe, life-threatening complications. So thiamine is essential for energy production in every cell, but especially in high-energy organs like your brain and your heart. Now, when thiamine becomes severely deficient, you can develop two serious conditions. The first one is Wernicke's encephalopathy, where your brain stops working properly, causing confusion, memory loss, and problems with eye movement and balance. The second condition is called wet beriberi, where your heart fails and you develop severe fluid overload. Both of these can be fatal if they're not treated quickly. The classic group at risk is people with alcohol use disorders, because alcohol interferes with thiamine absorption and increases its breakdown, creating this perfect storm for deficiency. But we also see it in people after bariatric surgery, where the stomach's been altered and absorption drops, and also in anyone who's severely malnourished, including the elderly or people with eating disorders. Now, the frustrating part is that thiamine deficiency is rarely tested for routinely, and by the time someone develops obvious symptoms, they're already in serious trouble. But treatment is incredibly simple. Just giving thiamine replacement can be life-saving. So this is one where a high index of suspicion and early treatment matters enormously. Moving on to number 11, which is sodium. And this one might surprise you because we're constantly told to reduce sodium intake for blood pressure. Now, that advice is generally correct for the average Western diet, which is loaded with salt from processed foods. But what people don't realise is that sodium levels can become dangerously low, especially if you restrict salt too aggressively, or if you drink excessive amounts of water, or take certain medications like SSRIs or antidepressants, which can affect how your kidneys handle sodium. Low sodium, called hyponatremia, causes dizziness, headaches, nausea, and confusion. In severe cases, it causes seizures and brain swelling. Now, what makes this really dangerous is that if you correct sodium too quickly, you can cause a devastating condition called osmotic demyelination syndrome, where the rapid shift in sodium levels damages the protective coating around nerves in your brain, leading to permanent disability or death. So sodium correction has to be done carefully. It has to be done slowly and under medical supervision, often in a hospital. On the flip side, excessively high sodium causes its own problems, particularly in people with heart failure or kidney disease. The point is that sodium is tightly regulated for good reason, and both restriction and excess can be dangerous depending on your individual situation. So as we reach the top of the ladder, we enter territory that's genuinely uncommon. Most people will never encounter these deficiencies, but when they do occur, they're often missed until someone becomes seriously unwell. And they almost always require specialist input to manage safely. Number 12 on the list is copper deficiency. And this one typically shows up in very specific circumstances rather than from general dietary insufficiency. Now, copper is essential for making red blood cells, maintaining your nervous system, and supporting your immune system. When copper becomes deficient, you develop anemia that looks similar to iron deficiency, but it doesn't respond to iron supplementation in the same way. You start developing nerve damage that causes numbness, tingling, and problems walking, symptoms that mimic B12 deficiency or even multiple sclerosis. The most common cause we see is actually too much zinc supplementation, because zinc and copper, like I said earlier, compete for absorption. So loading upon zinc tablets slowly depletes copper over time. We also see it after bariatric surgery, where the anatomy has been changed and absorption drops. This absolutely requires specialist management, because both diagnosis and treatment are really complex, and you need to balance replacing copper without causing toxicity. Number 13 is called selenium, and this is another one of those that sits in a category where both deficiency and excess are really dangerous, with a really narrow safe window in between. So selenium is crucial for thyroid hormone production and also for antioxidant defense systems in your cells. Severe deficiency can cause a specific type of heart muscle disease called Keshan disease, which was first identified in regions of China where soil selenium is extremely low. You can also develop thyroid problems and weakened immunity, but because the gap between too little and too much is so small, selenium toxicity happens more easily than with many other nutrients, causing hair loss, nail problems, and neurological symptoms. For most people eating a varied diet, selenium levels are fine without supplementation, and only people with very restricted diets or specific health conditions need to worry about it. Number 14 is phosphate, which you've probably heard of, and a low phosphate is something that we deal with fairly regularly in hospital because it occurs in a specific dangerous context called refeeding syndrome. So phosphate is involved in energy production and bone formation. When phosphate levels drop severely, which happens when someone who's been starving or severely malnourished starts eating again too quickly, the sudden influx of nutrients causes a shift of phosphate into the cells, leaving the blood levels dangerously low. This causes muscle weakness that can affect your breathing muscles, heart rhythm disturbances, and altered consciousness. It's a hospital-level emergency that requires careful monitoring and slow, controlled refeeding. Now, we also see low phosphate in people with alcoholism and in certain medical conditions. This isn't something that you should diagnose or treat at home. And finally, number 15 is vitamin A. Now, vitamin A deficiency causes night blindness and severely weakens your immune system, but it's extremely rare in developed countries because most people get enough through their diet. What's actually more concerning is vitamin A toxicity because vitamin A is fat soluble and it builds up in your body. Too much of it causes liver damage, bone problems, and in pregnant women, it can cause serious birth defects. This is why testing and specialist guidance is essential before you start supplementing beyond what's in a standard multivitamin. So having walked through all 15 deficiencies, from the common ones that drain your energy daily and the rare ones that can genuinely threaten your life, the pattern should be clear. Symptoms appear long before blood tests turn red. Normal on a lab report doesn't mean optimal, and definitely doesn't mean that you're not depleted. Most standard testing is designed to catch late-stage disease, not early deficiency. And perhaps most importantly, more isn't better. We know that restriction can be just as dangerous as excess for several nutrients, and guessing instead of testing is how people get into trouble. What I see constantly in emergency medicine is people who've been suffering with vague, miserable symptoms for years. The fatigue, the brain fog, the anxiety, the poor sleep, being told everything's fine because their blood tests come back normal. And then years later, when deficiency becomes severe enough to cause actual organ dysfunction, suddenly everyone takes it seriously. But by then, you've lost years of feeling well, and sometimes you develop complications that could have been avoided entirely. The problem isn't that we don't have enough supplements on our shelves, it's that we're guessing instead of testing early and understanding what our bodies actually need. If you're experiencing persistent symptoms that aren't explained, then push for comprehensive testing that includes ferritin, vitamin D, B12, folate, magnesium, and thyroid function at a minimum. And if you're in a high-risk group for any of these deficiencies, whether that's due to diet, medications, medical history, or lifestyle, don't wait for symptoms to become severe before investigating. And critically, if you're thinking about supplementing anything beyond a standard multivitamin, especially the nutrients that we've covered in the dangerous categories like potassium, calcium, or iron, then get tested first. The goal isn't just avoiding deficiency, it's avoiding both ends of the spectrum and understanding what your body specifically needs right now.